Hello, I'm Chris Athanas. I'm a KMP developer, and tech sport's coming out Tuesday for that thing. Finally, we'll see. I'm going to be watching this for the first time. I previewed the first couple minutes of it. Looks pretty good, so I want to watch it with you.
Here's the YouTube spoiler summary. Most apps today aren't built native. Good enough cross-platform options are generally good enough, but you still need to make a big, risky decision up front. If the result isn't actually good enough, there's not a whole lot you can do at that point before you start talking about a rewrite. And bear in mind, that's 2 apps, not just one. On the other side, you've got native apps, and maybe you pick native because it's the safe option, or maybe your users are going to love it. But when you get to the end, you might think, well, maybe something cross-platform would have been perfectly fine, but now you have to maintain these 2 apps forever or until you do a rewrite. Anyway, that's what we call the risk cliff. You have to make a big decision up front, but you don't know how it's going to go until the end. Yeah. KMP and Compose Multiplatform are fundamentally different technologies. Your Android app is a native app. There's no cross-platform involved. On iOS, you can blend some native UI into the shared UI, or you can write a completely native UI and share all the logic underneath. You can do that at any point in your product lifecycle. Yeah. That means no more risk cliff. You don't have to make a big decision up front. That's why I think KMP and CMP should be the default option for mobile. KMP. Not another option, the default. The Android community is...
I think it should be the default as well. And I was just got an interview with a company, and they are actually rewriting an Android app, and they were doing some security stuff, and they were just doing everything on Android, and they thought about they might want to do iOS in the future. I said, if you're doing an Android app today, Google, the recommendation is to do a KMP, right? To start off the gate. And then, because it's so easy to add on the iOS stuff later on, just how it's all set up. And people just, this is news to a lot of people. And it was news to them, but they didn't hire me. But I was trying to tell them, hey, this is a thing that's happening. And the guy was like, no, we're going to use Android XML layouts and Android activities and stuff. We're not going to try to do this KMP thing. We've heard about it, but we're going to wait and see. It's like, no, this has been going on for a while now. We've had it for a couple of years, and the iOS thing is just is new. It hasn't yet because the UI stuff hasn't come out yet, which is about to. By the time you see this, it probably will be. But so when that happens, it's like, okay, that's it. You got the UI, you got the system, you got the OS layer. I mean, why are you making this a hard decision?
Is essential for the success of these technologies. Then I rant about JavaScript and discuss advances in WASM and the future of KMP, Kotlin, and Compose for the web, which I really think is going to be a big deal. And it's coming a lot faster than you think.
I've got one app in the store that does the cloud view, so it does it on the web and on iOS and on Android, and it's just one code base. It does not. You can check it out. There's not much different between those 3 things.
That's the everything part. That's a summary, but if you like nuance and some jokes, please watch the full talk. Also, if you'll be at Joy-Con London, I'd love to chat, and don't sleep in. Day 2. Come to the keynote. This is an edited version of the keynote I gave at Joy-Con New York, and I'll be giving the same thing in Joy-Con London next week, but I wanted to do something that was a bit more YouTube-friendly, cut out the stuff specific for the conference, but retain largely the same message, and frankly, I didn't want to rewrite the script entirely, so I'm going to mostly just give the presentation with some cuts, and we'll see how it goes. A bit more about me. I was doing Android before there were actually phones. I was in the Android Developer Challenge, I guess 2008-ish. Our first clients were in 2010. This was when pretty much everyone just made an iPhone app, but when it came time for Android apps, they didn't know what to do. So I was the only person a lot of people knew. Touch Lab officially started in 2011. We ran the big New York City Android meetup since 2012. We brought the first Joy-Cons to North America in the form of Joy-Con NYC. Around 2015, I got really obsessed with J2OBJC and the whole concept of code sharing. And that lasted till 2018 when we officially switched everything over to KMP, and that's what we've been doing since. So a bit more, I'm a Kotlin GDE. I'm on the Kotlin Foundation Ecosystem Committee. We've done a ton of KMP library work, especially in the early on days, but continuing to do some pretty core stuff. And essentially, I've been making Android code work on iOS for almost 10 years. What are Android devs doing 10 years ago and today? And I would say all mobile devs, iOS included, is kind of a similar story. This started on the bottom 10 years ago. It's a representation of how likely you were to make something native versus not native, depending on how complicated your app was and how sensitive your users were to UX.
I'm red-green colorblind, so I have a hard time. So this one is the not native. So native is going down and not native. I'm colorblind. That's bad. Hey, Don't use red, green on your slides if you're trying to make a difference. Use blue, yellow, or
for
any
lack of
other
a better
color.
description. And
Like
at the time, most things were made
Dash,
native.
not
If you go back
Dash.
a couple years before that, pretty much everything was native because cross-platform was just really bad. And especially at the time,
Yeah, it's been bad. Before I got into KMP, I was on a React Native project trying to figure out if we can use that. No, that's garbage. Throw it away. Leave it alone. The iOS side, great. Android side, bad. And there's the whole thing with the cliff. Like, so now that those people, they have to do a rewrite if they're even in business anymore, or they have to go back to native. So man,
mobile was pretty high in the consciousness of the tech world. So a lot of startups were apps. So anything you were making really was likely to be native. And if you weren't to be native, it may not have gone that well, right? Fast forward to today, I would say this chart is even being conservative. It would be more to the right. If you're building some big, really complicated app, something really important, you might do native. Anything else, any other startup, anything happening now is probably picking something else. So a startup in 2014 might say, hey, where are the native devs at? And a few years later, it really started to change. So they might discuss other technologies and maybe do native, maybe not. Fast forward to today, I would say most startups are going to be doing something like React Native or Flutter. Or
oof, I hope not. React Native or Flutter. Ugh. They laid off people on the Flutter team. Flutter's done, man. And React Native, have you used it lately? Because KMP it doesn't have the same problems. React Native's got a lot of issues. KMP does not have those problems.
Everything else, perhaps a web thing, who knows? But it's not like native developers are doing less. The native development discipline has really coalesced around very large apps, very complicated, mission-critical apps for the products that they support. Over time, as less apps are choosing to go native, the ones that are native have become more complicated and require much more specific engineering to make them work. That leads to an interesting outcome. The whole native is dying discussion, which pretty much began when native started and continues to today. It's constantly predicting the death of native. Cross-platform will improve and eventually take over, and native won't be a thing. That's, of course, incorrect.
No, there will always be some native thing. But this KMP layer allows you to dip into the native because you're running in a container on the native system. So, like, it's all right there. You're just inside it. So you're not losing out.
It's not what happened, but the nature of what is native has changed. Certain classes of businesses and products really just depend on native, and the risk of trying to do something else to save a bit of money is generally not something that they would be considered acceptable, with certain exceptions. So the result on the native community I describe as we've entered sort of a Lagrange point where the size of the community hasn't really changed in any fundamental way. It's the gravity has just kind of stayed the same, although what they do has certainly changed. Web and mobile are essential. If you think about when the web started and the hype curve, when web first launched, hype went all the way to the roof about how this was going to change the world, it was going to do all these things. And
there's always that.
That certainly happened, right? But the ideas that people had in the beginning were not very useful. And it took a long time for that utility curve to swing up. At the same time, the hype curve has gone down. So like nobody really outside of web dev really sits around and talks about the process of web dev. But the utility, you can't imagine the modern world without the web. It's simply inconceivable. Web dev,
well, there would be something like it.
Along with web itself, is essential. Lots of different frameworks, lots of different takes on it, but fundamentally at the end of the day, it's still JavaScript and the DOM. Mobile.
Right, well, that's that browser, right? That's the one we've talked about. And that is the web currently in people's mind, but that's not the web. Like TCP/IP allows you to just do general communications. That was just some browser. What we get with with these mobile apps, right, is we're getting a custom browser. The custom browser is just our data. Well, could be another type of browser being developed. It's not a closed thing. It's not done. It's not over. HTML is not the final answer. It's kind of sucky in a lot of ways. Compose, like a Compose web, like a whole thing based on Compose, a whole web browser. It's all the web pages are actually just Compose. That'd be awesome.
Had a very similar hype cycle. So when mobile came out, obviously, everything's changing. Oh my God, this is the best thing since Fire. And in the beginning, a lot of apps arguably were not very, very useful. But over time, the utility curve swung up, the hype curve has gone down. Again, if you're not in native mobile development, you probably don't spend a lot of time thinking about the process of native mobile development. Mobile has certainly become essential. For many people, it's the primary way they interact with the digital world. And for a whole lot of people, it's the only way that they do so.
Yeah.
But native mobile is not essential to mobile development anymore. We have what we're calling the necessary middle here. And it's the place where you're going to build mobile, you need to build mobile, but you're not going to likely choose a native option. I really formally describe this as any product which needs mobile, but mobile itself isn't really the product itself. This screenshot here is from a system called Epic. It is for your medical data. If you go to a hospital or a medical system that has Epic, it's a really interesting experience compared to going to anything else. You'll get all of your data in there. You're walking out getting notifications about lab results. You can share with different doctors. I'm now going to two different systems that both have.
This is a perfect app for KMP because you just do the same thing you want on your browser, on your screen, at home, on your thing you're sitting down in front of, your sit down screen. is the same thing as your walk around screen. It's the same thing as your view view for entertainment screen. There's the 3 screens, right? And so KMP lets you do all of them, the same language, same background, same APIs, same one language, one set of libraries, one set of UI toolkits. So the same team can all work together. It's all the same stuff, and it's all native. So you're not giving up the native stuff. Like React Native, you always do this weird bridge. Like KMP is the core. Like the Kotlin is the core thing, and everything just runs. Whatever container you're in runs Kotlin. Like it's not super hard to figure out how this works. It's like they've really thought it out very well. So I mean, but it's you're not giving up anything.
Epic and I can share across borders. It's amazing. However, as a mobile developer, when I use the app, I really have to shut off that part of my brain that wants to circle things and say, this is really not so great. So what happened to this necessary middle? And to me, more importantly, why did it take so long? Arguably, the tech had improved long before.
Because you guys were all fighting. Because Google couldn't get along with Facebook, couldn't get along with Microsoft, couldn't get along with Apple. So you're all fighting it out, just like you did for the browsers. Really, the browsers are all so different. Oh my God, they're so different. HTML. Well, HTML sucks. It's time for a revamp. All that stuff is going to be up again. And KMP, what the JetBrains guys is just going to be there, the one layer between all these crazy people. It'll be the one interface layer between all the crazy people that want to do it all their different ways. Because it's usually the same stuff. There's like little things that are different for each one of these different platforms. Your iOS has got a little different APIs than Android. They got a little different than the desktop. They're different from the web. But they're all doing the same kind of stuff, so there could be a universal layer, and then the exceptions are on the edges. Okay, that's how KMP handles it.
For a lot of folks were jumping into it and using it. I attribute that to risk. Building mobile involves a very big decision you have to make up front, whether you're going to build native or you're going to choose something cross-platform.
Correct.
And it's a big risky decision because you have to make it before you start. But you won't know how it's going to go till the end. This is what we call the risk cliff.
Yes.
So think back 2016-ish, you have people trying to decide what they're going to build their app with, and it's relatively stressful.
Correct. This is before KMP. So KMP changes all this. The KMP literally changes all this whole thing that you might as well write it in KMP and we'll just figure out the target later. If we get banned out of the iOS store, we'll make it a web app or make it a desktop app. And we'll just distribute it ourselves. We'll forget the store.
Conversation. So somebody might throw out React Native as an option, but what happens if you get to the end and it's not good enough? Many times that means you have to do a rewrite, and this was a real concern back then. And not just a rewrite of your app. You have to.
It still is for people that still decide that, hey, let's do React Native. It's already cross-platform, just iOS and Android. You don't get anything else, like unless I know of. I don't think you go to the web or do desktop or do Linux or Windows or Mac OS desktop or a watch. I don't know. Can you do a watch? I have no idea. All I know is they do iOS and Android. Well, KMP is like, give it a container, let it go.
Now write to native apps. So it's quite a big decision you have to make up front. Fast forward to now, the conversation goes a little bit differently. The reason is the technology has improved considerably. So the chances that you're going to have to face that bad situation at the end, it's much lower. However, that cliff is not.
But it's still bad. It's lower, but it's still bad.
Gone away. You're just much less likely.
With React Native, you not only have to do React Native, you also have to do JavaScript or TypeScript and the native thing that you're trying to target for iOS and Android. So you're not getting rid of anybody. At least with KMP, you get rid of the Android guy. You just train up the iOS guy or the web guy, and it's not that much different if they've been doing React or doing Swift UI. It's not that much different.
You have to deal with it. Good enough is usually just that. It's good enough. Enter KMP and Compose, the new default choice for mobile. For a moment, let's just forget timelines and React Native is huge and this is missing from Compose, all these today things. Let's just think about what's happening down the road and let's keep a positive mind. So one of the things that KMP and Compose allow—
Who's not got a positive mind? There's always this stack at the beginning. It's like people are like, no, I can't give up my thing. I just spent 20 years developing my skill set. It's like, yeah, well, throw it away. You still get to use partial, like how things are put together, but the syntax and all that stuff, nope. But the thing is, Kotlin may be the last one you have to learn because of KMP, man. You go to all the iOS guy has to learn is this KMP thing, right? And Kotlin and Compose, and now he's got the web and desktop and Android. And all he had to learn was this little KMP part. Oh, isn't that interesting?
Allow you to do is something that I call optionally shared UI. It is important to understand that Compose multi-platform is fundamentally different technology than the other options. So if you take a look at, say, Flutter and Compose, they're very similar on paper from a technical perspective. They're both declarative UI models. They both render to a canvas, but they differ.
The good thing is, everyone's used to declarative UI models, so awesome. But how these things are done under the hood, bad. Flutter's bad. It's just bad. Okay, it was useful. It got us here. It was a nice proof of concept. Definitely prove what Compose is going to do, how they're going to do it. You give it a little rectangle in the native thing, and it just blasts. It just runs inside that, and that's what Flutter did. Great, but it's time for it to go. And Google agrees with me on this because they're laying off people in the Dart and Flutter team, but they don't do that. They're still going for it. And they didn't make Flutter the default choice. They made KMP the default choice for Android, not Flutter, KMP. So come on, writing's on the wall.
In one major and critical way. The interop. KMP and Compose were designed to talk directly to Swift and Objective-C, so you can mix these two technologies directly next to each other. The concept of optionally shared UI is that you can mix Compose and native iOS views directly in the same app, even in the same screen or just a handful of views, with the same KMP architecture underneath. And you can do this incrementally. You can make your app as native as you want. This leads to another concept that we have called the 80-20 UI, which 80-20 isn't even a valid measure. It's more than that, but that's just the 80-20 rule. Mostly KMP, but a mostly native user experience. So your users are usually spending all of their time on a few core screens. And then you could take Compose and do everything else except those core screens. So if you take this example here, this is Apple Health, who's probably not considering this, but on the left is the main feed. And although it doesn't
do the whole thing in Compose, forget all this native UI stuff. Just do it in the Compose, you'll be fine.
Super exciting. I can assure you that there were many meetings around about the radius of that line cap. And on the right is one of their labyrinth of setting screens that people almost never see, and they're certainly not going to care about. Well, you can do all of that with shared UI, do native UI for the core screens. So the user experience is really almost entirely native to the user, and the code is almost entirely shared. So one of the things that the interop enables that's critically different than all of the other options, including native, is that the risk cliff goes away. You can make Compose for everything, or you can decide to do a bunch of your screens on iOS and native, or you can do your entire iOS UI native, still sharing all that KMP, and you can do it at any point in time in your product lifecycle. Another thing to keep in mind is that the only cross-platform here is on iOS. Compose and Kotlin are likely what you'd use to make a native Android app. So the big apps that we had at the far end of that graph are probably not the target, at least not right now. I mean, they could be, maybe down the road. I'm talking about, again, the middle of that graph, the everybody else app.
Why not do the big apps? Why not? I mean, what are you talking about? Big apps, like 20, 30 screens, 100 screens? Why not do it in Compose? Why not? There's nothing I've done a big enough app to know that we can be big, huge apps. It'll be nicer and easier than doing the native stuff. I guaranteed.
Apps. This talk was given at an Android conference and will be given at another Android conference. So is this just an Android thing and I'm a big fan?
No.
Well, not really. I just like good apps and enabling better app experiences, but with equivalent cross-platform costs with the variable of you can do whatever you want with it down the road, it's going to make better apps overall. Flutter would absolutely be fine, but Compose multi-platform has the potential to be better.
Right. The thing is about the Flutter is they do Flutter I've heard about Flutter for the web. I don't know. I've never tried it. All I've heard is Flutter iOS and Android. But the thing is, can you do your desktop? What happens if you're not allowed to go on the web somehow, some way? You can still distribute your app by desktop. Like, what the heck? Look, all these things are doing the same stuff, right? They're drawing squares, circles, and stuff inside of a rectangle, responding to user input somehow, some way, and then interfacing with devices on the device and the network. What? And they're not doing so much, and KMP and the Compose allows you to monotonically adjust the screens without all this crazy, you are this kind of special thing to do the special screen. It's like, no, it's all, they've thought all that stuff through, man. It's like, they're not going to do anything. It's not, you don't have to worry about doing the native UIs anymore. Just do Compose UIs, and you're going to be on web, on Android, it's all the same stuff, right? And if you do have to drop down, it's not hard. It's very simple. It's right there. So you're running inside the native container.
And fine. This isn't to say that Flutter is bad and you should use Compose. Like, it's not a fight between.
Oh yeah, Flutter's bad. I'll say it right now. Flutter's bad. Give it up. Let it go. It's dying technology. It will be killed off 2026, 2025. There'll be some end of life thing. Like, we don't recommend this anymore. Just use Compose KMP because it's just a juggernaut. Because of how this cliff issue, and you don't have to make. You can defer the decision until later. For if you have to go back to native, you don't have to let go of that stuff. And you're in native. It's native.
These two things, they're both going to exist. I think it's better that both of these technologies exist overall for mobile development and for the quality of apps.
Flutter needs to go. Bye-bye.
I think Compose has a better sales pitch. So hopefully down the road, that conversation goes a bit more like this. Somebody mentions Compose, and then you're like, what happens at the end if it doesn't go well? Not much. You just have to tweak whatever you want and you're fine. One key thing here, I think most composed multi-platforms aren't going to bother with a native iOS UI.
Correct.
But it's different because you can. And the fact that you can do whatever you want
and
down the road eliminates
desktop.
that upfront risk. So now let's go back to reality a bit and talk about where we're at. Where is composed multi-platform? There's still a lot to do, but it's a lot closer than most.
I have 2 apps in the web store, in the stores on both Apple and Google stores, on iOS and Android. Fred's Road Trip Storyteller and the CloudView USA, and there are KMP apps running Compose on the pure Compose apps. And I didn't use any of the Android specific stuff, and it's all one big file. And I go through and how I've set the thing up and the reasons with design choices in a couple different series, so you can see what I did. It's already ready to go. And I was using the alpha version of iOS, and I'm looking at the crash reports. There's no crashes. This stuff is solid. It's working well. You should quit the Flutter, quit React Native, and just do the KMP. You'll do yourself a favor.
People think. Composed multi-platform in 2022 was not even really tech preview, and we managed to get an app in the App Store, but that's besides the point. 2023, alpha, 2024, beta, 2025. I mean, we'll see how it goes, but it's moving very, very fast. The Joy-Con NYC app is implemented with composed multi-platform. In fact, I think it was the first one in the App Store, almost certainly in 2022. In the settings, there's a toggle that you can switch between fully composed UI and a parallel Swift UI. And the reason we had that initially is because in 2022, composed multi-platform was really not doing that great.
Correct.
And you could see the difference between the two. But if you go in there now and check it out, it's dramatically improved. And it's really hard to notice anything bad at all about Compose and how it runs. There are various mechanical issues, of course. Nothing that's a deal breaker, but stuff that makes it harder at this point. I mean, setting up the build is more complicated, and the release.
Yeah, but it's always been like that. It's always been like that with Android and any of these cross-platform stuff. There's no simple one thing and one and done. But I think with what JetBrains is coming up with, this new build system that's supposed to replace Gradle, it'll make a lot of these issues go away, automatically handle all this stuff. And honestly, the build Gradle stuff they've set it up for KMP is actually thought through pretty good too. It's not as crazy as Google is doing it, hacking it together. They've actually kind of thought it through for the developer experience. So it's not as bad as it has been. He's still traumatized. Well, it's been bad. It's been the Gradle stuff. No. So he's traumatized, like, oh, there's always a smaller, let's just setting up the builds. Well, you have that whole project generator, which JetBrains got somebody get smart over there. They have a project generator, so it'll generate the sample, the skeleton code, and all you have to do is start adding libraries. And it's not that hard. It's actually quite nice, actually, compared to the Android before. And honestly, what the iOS looks like, it's the same hairy mess. But like, you're only going to change 20% of it. So it's just like figuring out that 20%. And the documentation, I gotta say, on Apple is pretty darn good. On Android, it's always been a clusterfuck. We got traumatized. We're both traumatized.
Are coming out pretty fast. So version numbers and how things glue together, you really have to kind of pay attention to what's going on. The technology is pretty new, so there's not anywhere.
It's 10 years old. I mean, the KMP stuff is what, 4? I don't know. It's pretty solid. I'm enjoying it, and I'm pretty picky.
Near as much help when you go out and look for it, all that kind of stuff. But they're mechanical issues. They're just a moment in time. It's important to keep in mind, apps are shipping now. Like, we are working on an app that's going to be many millions of monthly active users the second it launches, because it's an existing app, and we're really rewriting a whole bunch of the UI. Several apps have shipped. I know a bunch of apps in development. Like, this is happening right now. Community is essential. And I really don't think that this is going to be as big as it could be the default option if the community doesn't really step in.
Oh, no, it's going to happen on its own. Oh, no, when people figure out what they can save, instead of having a team of 10 people, you have 2 guys, the guy front end and the back end guy, and the front end guy does the web and the iOS and the Android, because he's just an Android dev that learned a little bit of iOS and a little bit of web. Come on now. And it is going to happen on its own. It's happening already. This thing cannot be stopped.
To make this happen. So one of the first things that really needs to happen is awareness. Like, nobody knows about the technology or the state it's in.
Yeah,
and that includes members of the Android and wider mobile community. Most of them think, well...
Who's listening to Android people? Ugh, I get it.
This was launched, a couple years ago. It'll be another several years before it's ready. And it's like, it's absolutely ready to go now if you know how to deal with the dependencies and all that kind of stuff.
I'm not very excited about too many things, but I'm pretty jazzed up about KMP, because it just lets you deliver apps front to back with one language. Holy crap, that's a big deal. Going back and forth between JavaScript, TypeScript, the front end, Node.js, Express, all little quirky, quacky. KTOR is awesome. KTOR 3 is amazing. It's amazing. All your stuff that you ever want to do with your sagas, your microservices, and all that stuff. It's all authentication. It's good. It's really, they're well done. I'm just really, and it's based on the stuff with Express, how they learned all the stuff, all the stuff that was crap about it, and all the stuff they wanted to make better. It's in one language, all of it. So it's like, all right, this is fun again.
So more importantly, far more importantly, are the folks that need to make decisions about mobile technology when they're building mobile. If you had this conversation today, it would go more like this. Nobody knows what Compose is. So they're not even going to consider it, right? And those are the folks that...
Well, good, because these are the people like, oh, we're at big Microsoft, or big Facebook, big company, blah, blah, blah. Oh, they're going to get their lunch eaten by a bunch of these devs because we're going to see a new renaissance of applications because it just got cheaper and faster and easier to build these things than it was just a couple of years ago. And I'm ringing the alarm, but people looking at me like I have 3 heads because I'm a little crazy. I mean, come on.
Need to understand what this is and what it's capable of. We also need better framing. Cross-platform has baggage. It is a ruined term.
Definitely.
And it's really not...
Oh, I've tried them all. Yes, and deservedly so. This life has been just garbage. Overhyped. Well, we're going to solve all the problems. And there's just one more problem after another, and deprecated and left alone and abandoned. And all the people who are super advocates disappeared. We never to be heard from again. Where'd they go?
Not even accurate for what Compose Multiplatform does. The other major thing that the community has to bring to the table is libraries.
Oh,
and I gave a pitch early on.
It's massive. It's like, dude, the libraries. I mean, what do you want to do? It's all there, man. It's all there. It's all there, ready to go.
On with KMP, and it's the same pitch.
Have you been looking? What have you not found that is not working? What are you talking about? And the thing is, the link, the bridge between the native, like with iOS, and even with web stuff, the linking bridge using state flows and shared flows. Come on. What else do you need? Just send a message over to the native side, do your thing, and let me know when you're done. Come on.
Now, if you've wanted to get involved in open source and you're an Android developer, it's really hard to build a new Android library and get any attention for that at all. But this is the beginning of an ecosystem. You can start building and have some core libraries.
True, that's true. There's always room for more of that stuff. There's always room, especially at this stage. There's always room for more of it. But everything you need is there. So maybe just instead of concentrating on building libraries, concentrating on building some apps. Going out there and socking it to some of these big companies that have been totally treating their customers like crap, like jipping them, treating them poorly, and fucking taking advantage of them, lying to them. It's like, come on. This stuff's all open for...
It's a great way to get involved. And Compose Multiplatform is a special situation. We have an existing ecosystem of Compose libraries that only work for Android at this point. We also have a bunch of native views that exist on both Android and iOS that need good, well-packaged joint bridging library, like a map or a video view. Libraries like that. But these are all mechanical problems, and they're the best.
I mean, I have an app in the store called Fred's Road Trip Storyteller. It uses maps, libraries. You can do this stuff today. There's nothing blocking. There's nothing stopping. It's totally... And I always show how this communication bridge back and forth between native and iOS, native and whatever platform you're on. Come on.
Best kind of problems, because you can solve them. They tend to be clear, and you know what to do. And that doesn't make them easy, but they're not really weird, hard to get your head around types of problems. The other thing to really keep in mind about Compose Multiplatform is it's extending an existing ecosystem, and that's why it's moving so much faster than other people would normally expect. Like if you were building an entirely new UI system, you got many more years, but we're essentially taking Compose, which has...
It's the standard UI system that's that's for Android, for all new Android apps. If you're still using XML layouts, you're making huge mistakes. So yeah.
It's had a ton of work on Android and making it work on the iPhone and other platforms. Similarly, we have an existing Compose ecosystem, and we have an existing ecosystem of native views. And making those work within the context of Compose is going to go much faster than if we had to write all these things from scratch. I've been obsessed with this whole concept for a decade, starting with J2OBJC. Android and iOS are essentially sandbox containers. KMP is as native on iOS as any other code. It compiles and runs within the same space. Now with Compose on top of that, it is essentially extending that blendable, shareable, great interop to the UI layer. And you know, finally, it's kind of good to feel like I'm not the crazy person out in the field screaming about something. Other people seem to be catching.
Well, without the UI layer, there's really, it's like, what are you trying to say, really? Because without that UI, I do have one app in the store that uses the native UI layer on iOS. It's just kind of, you have to learn the Swift UI and Compose UI. Well, and they're both doing the same goddamn thing. They're doing the same goddamn thing. So why do I gotta learn two? So without the UI layer, it's not compelling. Now with the UI layer, now you might be talking something, because now I can just write one UI for iOS, Android, web, desktop, Linux. That's Windows. I can always list these out. Mac OS, and whatever else comes along. I don't have to learn any more damn UI libraries. They're retarded. They're stupid. I hate them. I only want one. And Compose, they've already look at all that other crap and like cut out the stuff that's noise and put the stuff in that's just really amazing. It's the developer experience with Compose UI is amazing. I'm gonna say it's amazing.
Catching on, and hopefully they do, because this has just been my obsession for almost 10 years. All the pieces are in place to do this, to bring native or mostly native back to the spaces that
no, it's all left. Native.
And this community, the Android community, is the only one that can really make this happen. There is no reasonable.
We're the kick dog. We're the kick dog that's gonna come back and go, you shouldn't have kicked us so hard. You're gonna have to learn our stuff. Because iOS hey, is Apple gonna do a cross-platform solution? Hell no. Do you think Flutter's really gonna do everything that needs to happen to go on desktop and the web? They already said no. Like Google's always said, nah, we're good on that. Do you think Microsoft's going to do it? No. Do you think Facebook's going to do it? Well, they're trying, but they're not really trying because a last project I was on, half the Android libraries were deprecated, and you couldn't find out even if they were deprecated unless you dug through all the user agreements. It's silly. It's like, okay, that's done. That's done. So the Android are the ones that are left. We're the only ones left. They're like, okay, we're gonna put our stuff cross-platform because we can do that. We're gonna go ahead and that's what JetBrains says. We're just gonna go ahead and do that because who else is gonna do it? Not those guys. They already tried and failed. They're trying to make little proprietary things. Like no, we're not doing that. We're gonna run native everywhere. We're not gonna try our little thing everywhere. We're gonna run native everywhere. It's like whoa, okay, that's different.
Alternative Swift version of this. Technically a few attempts, but there's no major orgs involved and nothing's really moving. The groundwork is in place. Everything is lined up for Compose multi-platform to make this shift. Now we just need to make it happen. Call to action.
It's happening already.
Part of a good keynote. So what's everything? Well, it's a Hitchhiker's Guide reference, 42. The question, we'll see if that plays better in London next week. But what I'm talking about here is Kotlin, WASM, and Compose.
Yeah.
One of the things that's really irrationally bothering.
Or just JavaScript. I had to deploy the cloud one with JavaScript as the deployment engine. But who cares? It runs the same. It's all super fast. The WASM thing is a little overrated. I mean, it'll maybe run a little faster, be a little bit more secure. But I mean, who cares? I mean, it's just it already works. Okay, you can already deploy to the web, right? You can already deploy one code base written in Kotlin to the web today.
Bothered me for years is that everything has to live in the shadow of the web. Mobile had to live in the shadow of the web.
Because it's in the browser. Once it's outside the browser, we can do anything we want. This is what this Compose stuff is doing. It's like, oh, you don't like the browser? Oh, okay, where's your desktop app? And now you don't have a browser, so you don't have to worry about the browser. You just do whatever you want in the desktop app or the web app with the WASM, of course. But that's still in the browser. You don't want to. Okay, go to iOS, go to Android, go to desktop Linux. You don't want to. You don't. What? It's the same. All the same stuff.
Everything cross-platform was like the web, and you had to use JavaScript. And I don't know about you, I could go on and rant about JavaScript, but if you got to add a third equals, well, maybe you need to rethink what you're doing.
JavaScript has issues, but JavaScript got us here, so we all live with JavaScript. If you want to run the browser, it's JavaScript, or the WASM when everything, all these kinks got kicked out of it. But there's still some little gotchas. I tried to do the WASM target and it didn't work, but I do the JavaScript, works great. So that's one of the things with KMP stuff. You'd have multiple target languages as well. That's amazing.
And the open web really meant not IE, but is it really open? Right? Like everything else is a sandbox container.
Browser. So when they said the web, do you mean just the web browsers with HTML and JavaScript and all that stuff? Because that's not the web. That's just web browsers that browse HTML servers. That's not really the web. The web is all of it, right? That's how I think of it. So when we do a native application, we're not going on a web browser. We're now running natively on the device. So that's not really a browser anymore. It's like our own browser.
And the web is a pile of custom JS-specific APIs voted on by a committee. Like, where's my...
Well, they're voted on by the people who actually use the libraries. And some of it was committee-based, some of it wasn't. It's like, yes, that's how we got here. This is how often we get to these places. When we get to these inflection points, when everything gets standardized by a company like JetBrains, they usually come along. And they'll standardize something, and then we'll have another layer of stuff built on top of that. That's just how it goes.
Cool. I can't have it. Well, someone didn't want it. Like, okay, that doesn't seem to make sense to me. Now, I mean, don't get me wrong, open web is good, but a sandbox container would certainly be better. Cross-platform was all, again, JavaScript infects everything. Now, the heyday of that was a long time ago, but it's still huge with React Native. And all non-native mobile essentially meant web. Well, mobile doesn't have the restrictions of web, but you inherit them because now you have to do web stuff.
It's you don't have to. Who says that? Where's this kind of have to thing?
Architectural homogeneity. You have to live by the browser's rules, or you got to build multiple native apps. You know, we're living in the web shadow. So when I'm talking about WASM and Compose, I'm not talking about marketing pages or, you know, light stuff. I'm talking about utility apps. Again, Epic would be a great example because their web app isn't exactly amazing either. And I could see no reason why they wouldn't do something that is aligned with what they're doing on mobile. So we might finally get to answer this question. What happens to JS when you don't need it? I see a lot of reflexive pushback.
It's like, something else. What happened to Basic when you don't need it? What happened to COBOL when you don't need it? What happened to Fortran when you don't need it? Something else comes along. What? This is not new.
WASM will never replace JS. It doesn't need to.
It doesn't. It will never. We're still running Fortran. We're still running for COBOL. Still running Basic. I know it's hard to believe. We don't replace anything. Just add on. And maybe with something this tool is better for job. Did the when the screwdriver came out, did it replace the hammer? No, we still got a hammer and screwdriver for different jobs, for different stuff. Come on now.
Just needs to be viable and not, for whatever reason, take much more effort to develop than JS. It should be a better experience, and it very well could be.
Yeah,
of course, over time, things you never expect to happen have happened, right? Now, Adobe, I didn't know what to expect.
No, we saw deprecations before Flash was deprecated. Come on now. Come on now.
Flash held up like half the web forever. And I was thinking something more respectful than an ad for whatever the hell Express is. Anyway, JS and Flash are two totally different situations. I'm not saying JS is going anywhere. But
we're doing live with JS for the end of till the end of time. Just like we got Basic to the end of time, we got COBOL to the end of time, we got Fortran. So what? What are you talking? What are you saying? There's always a new technique that can extend our personal reach further, right? And KMP is one of those technologies. Techniques, libraries, software techniques, some software layer that was lots of people working on it that allows us to step on top and lift ourselves higher. Like, I don't know what are these. That's what Flash was. Before that, there was nothing like that. You couldn't do that. You had just buttons and crappy HTML, and you couldn't do anything interactive. Well, whose fault was that? I mean, well, that's because the people that did the HTML stuff really weren't thinking about Flash. They're thinking about scientific documents and that stuff. So building it on top of that was just a fluke.
Big things you never thought might happen have happened. And again, it's happening faster than I think most people realize. WASM was always a couple years away, and I think a lot of folks just stopped paying attention. But WASM GC is going to be the default in all browsers soon, which really opens the door for Kotlin to be able to be run. On top of that, there's this thing called Project Fugu, which essentially wants to make browsers able to do more app stuff. I mean, this is right from the page. Web apps should be able to do anything iOS, Android, or desktop apps can.
That's what KMP. That's welcome to KMP, baby. Welcome to KMP. That's what KMP is going to do. What? They already do it now. Today it doesn't happen today. Not going to. That's today. It does it today.
I agree. That gets us to architectural homogeneity. Essentially, web is a sandbox container for your apps.
Yeah.
Mobile may finally cast a shadow back. WASM as a platform is wide open at this point. There's no clear default language. WASM doesn't really need a default language, but Kotlin seems...
It's not supposed to be. It's like a JVM. WASM's like a JVM. It's like just this layer that all the stuff runs. You'd have a WASM runner, and then there you go. It's
like a pretty good option. If you asked me back in 2014, where are we going to be in 2024? I unfortunately probably would have said mostly web.
I would have said
but that's not really where we're at. Native isn't going anywhere, but it can be everywhere. If you'll forgive the abuse of native for a good quote.
Well, I mean, they could have. All right. They could have. Web could have been it, but they squabbled. They squabbled too much. And so the web lost. Now it's going to be KMP. I don't know what to tell you. They couldn't stop fighting. I don't know what to tell you. Next time, don't fight so much. I'm Chris Athanas. Thanks for listening to me rant a lot. And give me a like and subscribe, and I'll talk to you soon.